So welcome to Parshat Miketz. And I was tempted to talk about Yaakov again, but I remembered my promise last week that I was moving on to Yosef. I think there's something, I'm reflecting that there's something very powerful about Yaakov. I think I'd have to check, but I think he gets the most airtime of the three avot. Abraham gets a pretty long chunk too, but Yaakov's story really threads throughout these parshiot where he's not even the main star. And there's something about his personality that really draws me to him. I'm like interested in, I think he's a little bit dramatic is sort of my read a little bit. Like when he talks about having to send his children to Egypt where Yosef has requested them. And, he says like, if I lose them, I lose them. It's like, I can imagine, like a TV character saying that. But Yosef is his own interesting character and deserves his own time. And yet I couldn't find a lot of midrashim that really pulled me in about Yosef at first. And I was reflecting that perhaps it's because he's not such a good role model in a lot of ways, I think. And what I mean by that is like, we're sitting here on a beautiful night 3 of Hanukkah, when we talk about how we successfully fought the Greek assimilation and we held true to our values. And we look at Yosef, who pretty successfully manages to become Egyptian and to become very powerful in the Egyptian government and to pretty successfully sort of shed that the Jewish, character that I think he has on some level. And so I wonder if like that's a part of it, is like no one wants to pay too much attention to this parsha on that note, right? Because there's something very scary about it, right? I think we see it in its sort of clearest way when Yosef names his children, right? Names are super meaningful in Breshit. And, when Moshe names his children, we'll see that in Shemot also. When Leah names her sons, there's like a beautiful sadness to the name she picks. And so Yosef calls his firstborn at Shem HaBachor, Menashe, Ki nashani Elohim et kol amali et kol beit avi, because God has made me forget completely all of my toils and my father's house. And even just the pshat of that is like a little shocking, right? Like you would think that we would want Yosef to feel like a refugee, right? To want to go back to Israel, to want to go back to his family, maybe not his brothers, right? But his father, maybe Binyamin, his birth brother, his full brother. But it seems like Yosef is sort of willing to throw it all away. And in fact, in Breshit Rabbah, Rabbi Yochanan says, Yaakov shalem b'talmudo. He retains all of his learning. Aval Yosef shachach, but Yosef forgot his, right? So like we say during Hanukkah that the Greeks tried to make us banish Torah from us. And Yosef is just willing to forget all of his Torah, right? That it's not just his family, but Beit Avi is Torah, is Judaism on some level. There's something, again, very relatable to that. I can understand why why Yosef would want to forget his family. And there's a super interesting piece by Rabbeinu Bachaya, who is a 12th or 13th century commentator. He wrote a beautiful commentary on the Torah. And he says it's because of this name and this expression that Yosef had that we call the house of when one gets married and joins the house of one's in-laws. This English is sort of a very modern translation. We call it Beit HaShichacha, the house of forgetting. And I think that what Chazal is saying is that when a woman leaves her family to go to her husband's house, for her husband's family, it's like better if she forgets some of the things from her house, because it's very hard to be in two places at the same time. And when you are somewhere, you want to be there, right? And so it's not helpful to say, oh, well, at my house, we made latkes this way, right? Better to just go to your new home with your spouse and forget. And I don't know how I feel about this. I am someone who has brought many, many of my family's traditions to my marriage, and I feel very good about it. I don't know how my husband feels, but I think he likes it. When he asked me, he said to me, "Why didn't you make this soup or whatever on the first night of Sukkot?" I said, "Oh, I don't know." He said, "But you make it that way every year. That's like what your aunt does." And I said, "Oh, I didn't know like you cared so much. I'll go back to it, you know." And so I think that this forgetting piece is hard for me. And so I went looking for a place where Yosef might remember. And I was surprised that it was right there, right? So the Midrash is willing to hold on to Yosef being someone who wants to forget everything, including the Torah, and to hold on to Yosef as someone who actually very much wants to remember. And I think, you know, that's like, maybe that's life, right? And it happens in this really interesting way. Any literary buffs out there? That's not even really the word. Does anyone know what a contronym is?
A who?
A contronym?
Never heard of it.
No.
It's in the English language, it's when one word means both its definition and the opposite of its definition.
Ah.
So like to dust means to remove dust from your furniture, or to dust, you know, powdered sugar over a donut means to like add dust, so to speak. Right, to I had two more examples and now they've totally escaped me. But I'm sure we can think of other ones.
I get it.
To leave it. I think that's another one, right? Like leave it here, or I'll leave now, right? Like lots of words like that. And so we have a contronym in this week's Parsha. And I think it really highlights Yosef's like uncertainty. Does he want to remember? Does he want to forget? So it says, so I'm going to read it in Hebrew because you can hear it a little more, but even in Hebrew, because of the tenses, it's a little bit hard to hear the contronym. It's not exact. But Vayar Yosef et achav, Yosef saw his brothers, v'yakrim, he recognized them, right? The root of kuf resh mem. And then vayit naker, which is the same root. It's just that nun is in there because it's like a hefil or a, I don't know, I'm embarrassing myself on my own recording with my lack of grammar knowledge, right? But vayakrim and vayit naker come from the same shoresh. And in the first word, it means that Yosef recognized the brothers. And in the second one, it means that he acted like a stranger towards them, right? So on the one hand, the shoresh means to recognize. And on the other, it means to be so different that like you don't recognize. Right. And I think that there's like the Torah is expressing that uncertainty. Does Yosef want to be recognized, or does he want to be a stranger? Right. And he speaks to them harshly, and he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. And there is this long, interesting Midrash Tanchuma that, again, I think just like really beautifully captures maybe some of Yosef's inner emotions here. So Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shimon, the son of Shimon, said that Af Yosef Yodea Hayash Achav Yordin LeMitzrayim Lishbor Ochel. That Yosef knew that his brothers were descending to Egypt to obtain corn. And maybe the Midrash means like he knew within 5 minutes. But I read this beautiful Dvar Torah by Avital Hachzin, who is a teacher at Hadar, the Hadar Institute in New York, where she said maybe that this means like Yosef was aware from his very first step, right? Yosef interprets the dreams with like an action element to them. That's one of the things that makes him so powerful and good at his job. Fine. And sorry, I have another little visitor. So maybe Yosef interpreted the dreams in a way that he knew would get his brothers to come to him. Like we think that Yosef was trying to save himself and please Paro, and also, you know, keep the region sort of afoot in a time of famine. But really, maybe it was all sort of like a master power play to get his brothers to come to him. He so desperately wanted to remember them and to be remembered by them. And so he creates this scenario in which the brothers will have to come to him. So whether it's a few minutes, a few months, or whether it's like really sort of a bigger plan, Yosef clearly has his brothers on his mind, right? And he devises this very complicated plan to get the brothers to come directly to him, right? Because Egypt is a big place with many storehouses of food. And so what does he do? Ma'asa, Hoshiv Shomrim al Kol HaPtachim Va'amar Lahem, Re'u Kol Mi Shenichnas Lishbor Ochel, Kitvu Shmo V'Shem Aviv. Right? He says that he puts guards at every entrance to the state. And he says, when they come in, when the people coming to get food come in, you must write down their name and the name of their father. La'erev heviu b'takim. And at night, you have to bring them to me. And every night, Yosef would sit there and read through what must have been pages of lists of names, looking for his brothers, right? And to me, there is something like so, I don't know the right word, but so like poignant about that. This idea that Yosef, the grand vizier, who's totally assimilated, who's named his child about forgetting Beit Aviv, spends hours poring over lists looking for his brothers' names every night. Something like a little bit maybe like haunting about it. Like he can't outrun his memory. Please leave me. So then what happens, right? Yosef does this. He reads them, and the guards bring the lists. And Yosef finally finds their names, right? The names of Reuven, the son of Yaakov, Shimon, the son of Yaakov, Levi, the son of Yaakov, right? And so when that happens, when he gets that list, he closes all but one of the storehouses, the otzarot in the state, so that he can be at the right place, right? He doesn't have to wonder which storehouse they'll go to or follow them or whatever, but he'll be able to find them wherever they are. And he gives their name to the official in charge of the storehouse. And he says, when these brothers come to me, please seize them and bring them to me. Right, so clearly this Yosef, who does not want to remember, has devised a pretty clever plan to ensure that he'll get his brothers to come to him. And then there's like another, what'd you say, Anna? For Sherry? Does someone have a question?
No, you were frozen for a minute there.
Oh, okay. Am I working? Oh, gosh.
Now you're okay.
Probably for the best. A little loud over here. Okay, so Yosef, who says he wants to forget, has devised a pretty complicated and intense plan, because I think he very much remembers, right, that his brothers, and he wants to see them on some level. And of course, it's not like all love and rainbows, right? He says, seize them, right? Tfosotam, and make them appear before me. And if the Midrash stopped there, I would think it was an interesting sort of complexity of Yosef's forgetting and remembering. But then it goes, there's like another twist, in which the brothers seem to be searching for Yosef, which I think is beautiful. So 3 days pass, right? So they enter, by Israel, wherever people would, cross the border. And it should take about 3 days for them to get to this storehouse, and he's not there. And so Yosef gets nervous because they haven't come. And so he dispatches Shivim Giborim Mi Beit HaMelech, right? 70 powerful men from the king's guard. And he sends them to the marketplace. Now, that's an interesting place to send them, right? It's sort of unclear. Maybe that's just he assumed they tried to sort of get food on like the black market, or they got lost somewhere. But I think we're gonna see that maybe he thought that he remembered that they might remember. That they found the brothers in the district of harlots. And there was a note, which I removed because I thought it was unnecessary, that said, do not think that these holy men would go visit prostitutes. Because why did the brothers go to this district? they said to each other that, right, Yosef was known as someone who was Yefat Toar, Yefei Toar v'Yefei Mar'eh, Shema b'Kubahu, right? Perhaps he's in a brothel. Oh, I'm sorry, this is where the asterisk went, right? Don't think that Yosef would go to a brothel on his own. It's that they thought he would have become a sex slave, basically. And so they went looking for him. And so to me, there is like this, this beautiful sort of like missed connection story here. I don't know. Have you guys ever read those? I think sometimes they publish them in the New York Times. They're very popular on Craigslist, like where you like see someone coming up the escalator and you say, oh, like my number is this, and they get the number wrong. And so you post a missed connection. I almost feel like this is a missed connection, right? Yosef's brothers did not forget Yosef, and they did not forget the terrible thing they did. And so it seems like they sort of had a dual goal when they left Egypt and they decided to go down to, when they left Israel and they decided to go down to Egypt to get food, right? They thought, oh, this is the perfect time, right? They can't tell their father that they want to look for Yosef because they told their father Yosef was dead, right? But they have this assumption that he perhaps has been sold into some kind of shuk shel zonot in Egypt. And so they think, well, we'll tell dad that we need to go get food and we'll go looking for him. And that's so beautiful because you don't see that in the shot of the text. This sort of desire of the brothers, like to make sure that Yosef was okay. And Yosef, right, who pretends so clearly to forget, not only does he remember, but he hopes that his brothers went to find him, right? And so that maybe is why he sends the 70 powerful men to the shuk shel zonot. Otherwise, it's kind of a weird place, right? See asterisk, a very nervous translator. Why would he think his brothers, that's where they would waste their time on the way to get food for their families? It's as though he was seeing, maybe they're looking for me, right? Maybe he has the same idea. He knows he's a pretty looking man, right? He says, maybe they thought I went there. And so in some ways, it's like, it's a delayed gratification because we don't know, right? Yosef and the brothers don't know, they don't have that reunion now. But like, it's almost like, could you imagine if he ran to the shuk shel zonot to find his brothers, right? And they ran into each other there, like how happy it would have been to say, like, I knew you didn't forget. I knew you didn't forget, right? I think there's such a reunion here that is delayed in coming. And I really think that that's what the contronym is there for. I think that Yosef he can't decide what he wants to be. Does he want to be remembered? Does he want to be forgotten? Does he want to be recognized? Does he want to be like a totally assimilated Egyptian? Does he want to be Jewish, right? Like whatever that means. Does he want to be of Bnei Yaakov? Or does he want to be, I forgot his name all of a sudden, right? But the vizier of Egypt. And so the Torah uses those two words back to back to say he could be recognized or he could be a stranger, right? And we almost don't know at this moment who Yosef is. Because although this midrash I think is beautiful, and I love it very much, Yosef does not treat his brothers well for the next several prakim, right? Like it's not the reunion that we want it to be, and I don't fully know why. I think the tests feel sort of unnecessary. Yeah, Sherry.
Well, yeah, Ella, I was thinking that they were pretty cruel to Joseph all those years ago. So Joseph, I don't know if he would trust right away the reunion.
Yeah.
I mean, if they had a chance, maybe they would put arm's way again.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying like the feeling is genuine, but the hesitancy is totally justified, right?
That's what I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Right.
fair.
So I'm thinking something similar, that even if he wants to be reunited with them at once, but he still needs to be sure that they've changed, that they've learned or that they've grown.
Yeah. So I am someone who wants everyone to like always be happy in my family. So maybe it's like I want the fact that he found them in the shuk shel zonot to be enough, right? Like they were looking for him, they care about him. But I think that you're both right? That like we see that the tests are actually sort of carefully orchestrated to just try to understand the family dynamic. And so he does want to see that they've changed. And in fact, right, when he sees Binyamin come, I think it shows him that not only have the brothers changed, but that Yaakov has changed, that Yaakov is no longer like hoarding his more precious sons to the same degree. And so although he is one of the more precious sons, that didn't really get him very much. So I think that maybe that is reassuring to him as well. And I think that this week's Parsha ends on the cliffhanger, maybe for that reason, right? We come from a cliffhanger. This is very much like a part of the process. We come from 2 years of Yosef sort of languishing in jail, and we leave before the reunions happen. And maybe that's because this is the Parsha where Yosef has to decide, right? He gets to be this Egyptian, and then he gets to choose if he wants to find his family and to reunite or not reunite, right? It would be interesting to imagine what might have happened had the brothers behaved differently. What might Yosef have done? Who knows? Luckily, they rose to the challenge. So not a very long class tonight, as I said, a little bit late in coming. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So did you say earlier that at the time of his early dreams, his childhood dreams, that Yosef anticipated that ultimately the brothers would be coming to Egypt, and that's where the bowing down would occur?
Oh, no, I didn't say that, although I have heard that before. I was saying that perhaps from the time that Yosef interpreted Paro's dreams, with this element of becoming the storehouse for that region, that he was hoping or imagining that his brothers would then have to come to Egypt and to be able to see them.
Okay, yeah, I remember now. You did put it that way. Okay, but then did you also say that there's an interpretation that in a prophetic, not only was his prophetic dream foreknowledge, but that it also, through his interpretation of the dream, he brought it into being, he brought it into reality?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, right? I think I read Rabbi Sachs was saying like there are 3 key parts to understanding a dream, right? The first is like having an understanding of the context and the dream, and the person. Maybe the person is the second piece. I'm not going to be able to remember the second piece right now. But the third piece is being able to implement some action based on the dream, right? And so Paro didn't need just to understand his dream. He needed to understand what to do with his dream. And that's what made Yosef so successful. And so I think if we think about that third successful step as like a more personal goal that Yosef was fulfilling, it might be this hope that his brothers would have to come to Egypt, because without the famine, it's unclear when the brothers would have ever maybe gone, right? The forefathers only went to Egypt at times of hunger.
Mhm.
And so it's almost as though like maybe he saw his chance in this moment to maximize on the dream. Right, it's kind of how I was thinking about it. Like he put into play a good plan. There's no question it was a good plan, but he saw this silver lining, maybe. Which to me, the importance of that is that even as he's saying, I hope I forget my Beit Avi, he also is enacting a plan because he remembers and so very much wants this reunion with his brothers. And not necessarily, as you guys were saying, right? Not necessarily to have like a heartfelt hug, but really to maybe to lord it over them, to say like, now I'm the vizier and you're the nobodies, right? I don't think that it's all nice feeling, but I think that it could have been set. It could have been set into play much earlier. My 4-year-old is working him up.
Yeah.
And I believe that Yosef had that kind of forethought, because I think right through all of his tumult, he's very quick thinking on his feet, and he's able to, right, I don't want to call him a con man because that feels disrespectful of Yosef HaTzadik, and I don't think he is a con man, but I think he has a lot of the the skills, right? He's very good at reading people and situations. He's good at endearing himself to people, right? Before Potiphar's wife, he was actually like he had landed in a good place with Potiphar. And then to read everyone's dreams well, I think of course takes divine help, which Yosef was worthy of, but also takes this ability to read the scene. And he understood what Paro wanted and needed in a very powerful way. And that enabled him to get what he wanted, which was this reunion in the time and place of his choosing. Right? He was able to guide them to the Otsar of his choosing, and he was able to be on like home turf. He didn't have to go back to Canaan, right? Even with like a retinue of followers, it could be in Egypt. And it could be in a place where he could do these silent tests also, you know. But I think that we just see this very real feeling of wanting to both remember and forget when you're in a new place, when you've suffered trauma, when, you know, it's complicated, right? Especially with his brothers. But to say that he wanted to forget his brothers is one thing. To say he wants to forget Beit Avi, I think is very strong. Especially because presumably he and Yaakov had a very loving relationship. And so I think sometimes it's just easier to forget on some level. And maybe that's what he's expressing at that moment. At least that's sort of how I squared it in my own head.
It's interesting to think, like you said, it would have been easy for him to say to Pharaoh, listen, I've got an errand I need to run back in my homeland, and I'm going to take a posse of your officers. And that wouldn't have been, for him, a good solution. I mean, he would have been walking into an unknown situation.
Yeah.
And he could have, well, yeah. That's really
yeah.
Right. He could have sent for the brothers, right? But then also he would have had to show his hands on some level. Because why would they have been beckoned to some vizier's office in Egypt? And so in some ways, and obviously he couldn't orchestrate the famine, but once he got the famine, he was able to orchestrate what he wanted after that. Yeah. So, you know, I think we'll see more of Yosef in next week's Parsha when he is reunited with his father, and there's like a lot of beautiful Torah there. But this week he's like still sort of figuring out who he is in Egypt and who he wants to be and how to make sort of himself shalom with his past. And now you can be on the lookout for contronyms. They're actually very fun once you start looking into them. All right. Well, I was saying before you got on, Avery, that I'm not sure if I will still come before Shabbat, but I will certainly be there after Shabbat. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting everyone in person on Monday or on Tuesday at late at night, should you be there. And I will see you then. Early Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.